with a notarized gift letter proving it was hers. They didn't ask. They didn't tell me. They just took it and turned it into a swimming pool in my sister's backyard. $17,000. That's what they decided my daughter's future was worth. When my 91-year-old grandmother found out, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply smiled and said, "That cello is part of my trust." 3 days later, my parents opened a certified letter and went completely pale. My name is Marina Hawthorne. I'm 34, a paralegal, and a single mother. And this is the story of how my own family stole from my child, and how a 91-year-old woman proved that paperwork hits harder than any shouting ever could. If this story hits close to home, tell me where you're watching from. Now let me take you back to last September, the week everything started to fall apart. Our apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with a window that stuck if you pushed it too far, and a living room where every piece of furniture came with the same story. We got it on sale. We rented it from my family. Or at least, that's what I believed at the time. But what made that place feel like home wasn't the furniture. It was the sound. Every afternoon, around 4:15, Lily would sit by the window in her room, open the case, lift Harriet into her lap, and play. Harriet was her cello, a 1925 Karl Hofmann, German-made, with a fine hairline crack across the top plate that had been repaired decades earlier. If you traced your finger across the varnish, you could feel the exact point where the original wood ended and the restoration began, like a scar that had healed perfectly. My grandmother, Margaret Ellison, gave it to Lily when she was 7, right after her first recital. Margaret had played that same instrument at Carnegie Hall back in 1958. It had followed her through 2 marriages, a cross-country move, and more than 60 years of life. And then she placed it into my daughter's hands, like she was passing down something sacred. "This cello is worth more than a car," Margaret told me afterward, her voice calm and exact, the way retired music professors speak. "But its real value is that it remembers every room it's ever been played in." Lily named it Harriet after a composer she'd read about at school. Every morning she'd open the case and whisper, "Good morning, Harriet," like she was greeting a friend. That was the part my parents never understood. They saw $22,000 sitting in a bedroom. Lily saw her best friend. When Margaret gifted the cello, she signed a notarized letter transferring full ownership to Lily. I scanned a copy into my files that same week. The original stayed in Margaret's cabinet with her attorney. At the time, I thought it was just her being careful. Later, I realized it was her being prepared. Sunday dinners at my parents' house were always a performance. My father, Axel Hawthorne, sat at the head of the table like it was his throne. My mother, Julia Hawthorne, moved around him, serving, smiling, refilling glasses, making sure everyone noticed her doing it. My younger sister, Vanessa Cole, would arrive late every time, her twin boys already loud and restless, tearing through the house like little storms no one ever tried to stop. Her husband, Derek, claimed the best chair without asking and launched into stories about his sales numbers at the dealership, as if anyone had been waiting to hear them. And then there was Lily. My daughter sat at the very end of the table, on a folding chair they kept in the garage. A folding chair. For a 10-year-old. I had asked twice for something proper. Julia just smiled and said, "We only have 6 chairs, Marina. Don't make this a problem." 3 weeks before everything unraveled, we were at dinner when Vanessa started complaining. "The boys are losing their minds stuck inside all summer. Every house on our street has a pool. It's honestly embarrassing." Julia nodded immediately, as if Vanessa had just described something urgent and tragic. "You're right, sweetheart. The boys need space." Axel grunted his agreement without looking up. At the far end of the table, Lily spoke quietly. "Grandpa, my recital is next month. I'm playing the Elgar piece. It's all cello." Axel didn't even glance in her direction. "Maybe you should try a sport, like your cousins." Lily went still. I watched her fold her napkin into a perfect square, the way she always did when she was trying to swallow something too big to say. So I changed the subject. I always change the subject. What I didn't notice, what I should have noticed, Was Vanessa texting under the table? For just a second, I saw her screen. The words pool contractor, and a number with far too many zeros. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I would later. The second week of September, I had to take a case across the city. It kept me tied up for 3 days. Property records, document pulls, coordination with opposing counsel. It wasn't glamorous. A business hotel, a rental car, long hours under fluorescent lights. But it was my job, and I was good at it. That same week, Lily had music camp across town. They provided practice instruments, so Harriet stayed home. I placed the cello carefully in her room, closed the case, and locked the door. Not out of fear, just instinct. You protect what matters without thinking about it. The morning I left, Julia called. "Let me keep the spare key while you're gone," she said. "Just in case something happens." I handed it over. She smiled, that tight, controlled smile she uses when she's being helpful, in a way that costs her nothing. "Don't worry," she said. "Everything will be exactly where you left it." It was the last sentence she ever said to me. That sounded honest. 2 days into my trip, my father came by the apartment. I only found out because my neighbor, Helen Carter, mentioned it casually when I got back, like it was nothing unusual. "Oh, your dad stopped by on Tuesday," she said. "Said he was checking the pipes." Then she hesitated. "He had a dolly with him, though. Seemed like a lot. For pipes." Axel Hawthorne was a retired general contractor. He could open almost any lock in a house built after 1970 without breaking a sweat. I used to think that was just one of those harmless, almost impressive things about him. It stopped feeling harmless very quickly. I got home Thursday afternoon, a day before Lily returned. I set my bag down, poured myself a glass of water, and walked straight to her room to check on things. The lock had been changed. I stood there holding my key, staring at a brand-new brushed nickel deadbolt where the old brass one used to be. For a second, I thought maybe building maintenance had done it, but no, this was my parents. This was Axel. I found the spare key sitting on the kitchen counter. I used it to unlock the new deadbolt and push the door open slowly. The cello case was still in the corner, but something about it was wrong. It leaned too lightly against the wall, at an angle Harriet would never have allowed. I crossed the room in 3 steps, dropped to my knees, and unzipped the case. Empty. The velvet lining still held the imprint of the instrument, a faint, hollow outline where it had once rested. The bow was gone. The rosin was gone. Even the small cloth Lily used to wipe the strings. Gone. Everything. My heart didn't race. It just stopped. One long, hollow beat of nothing. And then it started again, colder. I called my mother. "Where is Lily's cello?" Julia's voice was light, practiced. "Oh, sweetheart. Your father took it in for maintenance. It needed restringing or something." "Which shop?" "I don't remember the name. Just ask your father." I called Axel. Voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. A third time. Voicemail. The next afternoon, Lily came home from camp. She dropped her bag by the door and ran straight to her room. She saw the case, smiled, and opened it. She didn't cry. That was the part that broke me. A 10-year-old standing in front of an empty case, holding her bow hand in the air like she was still waiting for the music to begin. "Mom," she asked quietly, "where's Harriet?" I knelt down in front of her and took both her hands. "I'm going to find out," I said. "I promise." That night, I called Margaret. No answer. Her caregiver, Evelyn, told me she was at a doctor's appointment and would call me back the next day. So I called Rachel instead. "Something is very wrong," I told her. And just before midnight, I checked my email. There was a notification from the homeowner's insurance portal. Claim number 7829-A, high-value item removed from premises. I never followed up on the claim. I didn't need to. I already knew who took it. The next morning, I drove to Vanessa's house. I didn't call ahead. I didn't want her to have time to prepare anything. I turned onto her street and saw it before I even parked. A backhoe in the yard, a trench carved 6 feet deep into the lawn, Two workers laying rebar under the morning sun. A pool. They were building a pool. Derek stood at the edge of the trench with his arms crossed, watching like he'd ever built anything in his life. Vanessa leaned against the fence, phone in hand, snapping photos of the construction behind her. She'd already chosen a filter. I stepped out of the car. "Vanessa, who's paying for this?" She looked up, startled for half a second, then recovered with that quick, polished smile. "Oh, Mom and Dad, it's a birthday gift for the boys." "How much?" She shrugged. "I don't know exactly. Like 100,000 or something? I didn't deal with the details." 100,000. Something. She said it the way people say a few $100s, like it didn't matter. Like it wasn't my daughter's future sitting at the bottom of that hole. I got back in my car and called my father again. This time he answered. His voice was flat, dismissive. The tone he used when he'd already decided the conversation wasn't worth his time. "Marina, calm down. The cello was a family asset. I sold it to a dealer in Seattle. Silverbridge Fine Strings. 22,500. Your mother and I decided to use it for the family. The boys needed a pool." "That cello belongs to Lily," I said. "Margaret gave it to her. There's a notarized gift letter." Axel paused. Exactly 1 second. Then he said, "Your grandmother is 91. She doesn't remember what she signs anymore." And he hung up. $22,500. He said it like he was reading a receipt, not like he had just taken 3 years of my daughter's joy and 60 years of my grandmother's life and sold it. But he made one mistake. He told me the dealer's name. 2 days later, Axel called what he described as a family meeting. His words, like we were a board of directors, and he was the one in charge. Of course, it was held at my parents' house. Axel sat at the head of the dining table. Julia sat beside him, already holding tissues, ready for her performance. Vanessa sat with her arms folded, jaw tight, playing the role of the misunderstood daughter. Derek hovered near the fridge, opening a beer like this was entertainment. Even Patricia and Thomas had been invited. An audience. I came alone. Rachel stayed with Lily. Axel opened the meeting like he was delivering a verdict. "Marina is overreacting. The cello was a family item stored in a family property. We made a reasonable decision to use it in a way that benefits all the grandchildren." Julia dabbed her eyes softly. "I just want things to be fair. Lily can learn on another instrument. She's young. She'll adapt." Vanessa leaned forward. "My boys have never gotten anything from this family. Lily has everything. Grandma Margaret, lessons, camps. It's not fair." Thomas cleared his throat. Patricia stared down at her plate. No one looked at me. I let the room fall completely silent. I held it there for 3 full seconds, long enough for everyone to hear the low hum of the refrigerator behind us. Then I spoke. "That cello was a notarized gift to a minor," I said. "This isn't a family decision, it's theft." Axel's face darkened immediately. "You want to bring lawyers into this?" he said. "Fine, but don't forget who owns the roof over your head, Marina." I stood up, picked up my jacket, walked toward the door. "I'll remember," I said quietly. "And so will you." And I left. No shouting, no tears, no scene. I had something better than a scene. I had a plan. Within 48 hours, my phone lit up. 11 calls. Julia had been busy. She had reached out to every relative she could think of and handed them her version of the story. Marina was threatening to sue her own parents over an old instrument. Marina was ungrateful. Marina was tearing the family apart. Patricia texted first. "Don't embarrass the family, Marina. This isn't who we are." Then Thomas. "Your parents raised you. They sacrificed for you. Show some respect." A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years sent me a message online. "Heard you're causing problems. That's really disappointing." 11 calls, 14 messages. Not one of them asked what actually happened. Not one of them asked about Lily. Rachel came over that night. She sat at my kitchen table, scrolled through the messages on my phone, and shook her head slowly. "This isn't a family," she said. This is a cartel that happens to eat together on holidays. I let out a short laugh, even though nothing about it was funny. From Lily's room, I could hear her practicing. Her school had loaned her a basic student cello, factory-made, thin, almost hollow in its sound. Nothing like Harriet, but she played anyway. Scales, arpeggios, then a careful, uneven attempt at the Elgar piece. She didn't complain. She never did. That was who Lily was. She just kept going. And something inside me shifted. Not loudly, not all at once, just a quiet, steady click, like a deadbolt sliding into place. I opened my laptop and pulled up Google Drive. The file was exactly where I left it. Margaret_Ellison_gift_letter.pdf. I opened it and read every word slowly. I, Margaret Ellison, irrevocably gift the 1925 Carl Hoffman cello, serial number KH-1925-7781, to my great-granddaughter Lily Hawthorne, to be her sole and personal property, signed, dated, notarized, stamped by the state. I closed my eyes for a second, then reached for my phone and dialed Margaret. "Grandma," I said when she picked up, "I need to talk to you about the cello and about the house. Before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand something about how I grew up, because it explains why it took me so long to push back. When I was 17, I got accepted into college. Partial scholarship. I was proud, the first in my family to make it that far. My father sat me down at that same dining table and said, 'The college fund is for Vanessa. She'll need it more. You'll figure something out.' So I did. I worked 2 jobs for 4 years, graduated. Spent nearly a decade paying off my loans. Vanessa enrolled in community college for a semester, dropped out, and married Derek. The college fund paid for her wedding. When my marriage ended, Lily was 2. I called Julia. Her first words weren't concern. They were, 'You couldn't keep your husband, and now you want to come back here?' 2 weeks later, she called again. She said she had found me a place, a rental owned by the family. The apartment Lily and I were living in now. The conditions weren't written down anywhere, but they were clear. Sunday dinners, driving Vanessa to appointments, handling Axel's paperwork during tax season, no contract, just obligation, dressed up as generosity. I did it for 4 years. Because I was afraid. Afraid that if I stopped, Lily would lose what little family she had. Afraid she'd grow up feeling like she didn't belong anywhere. That fear kept me quiet for a long time. But that night, sitting in my kitchen, listening to her play on a borrowed cello that sounded thin and hollow, something in me finally gave way, not loudly, just a small fracture. Like the fine line in old wood you only notice when you run your finger across it. Julia always said it was the family's house. Axel always called it his house. One of them was lying. Maybe both of them were. I needed Margaret to tell me the truth. She called me back the next evening on FaceTime. She was sitting in her usual armchair, the green velvet one with the brass trim, wearing a cream cardigan buttoned neatly to the top. Behind her I could see the upright piano and the framed photo from Carnegie Hall. At 91, Margaret Ellison still carried herself like a woman who had spent a lifetime conducting orchestras. "Tell me everything," she said. So I did. The empty case. Axel's admission, the dealer, the pool, the meeting, the calls. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she went quiet. 5 seconds. I counted them. Then she spoke, her voice steady, precise. "Marina, the house your father lives in, I never transferred it to him." I felt something shift under me. "It's held in the Ellison Legacy Trust," she continued. "He's there with permission. The deed has always been in the trust's name." I stared at the screen. "But he's always said, Axel has been saying things that aren't true since he was a boy," she replied calmly, adjusting her glasses. Then she added, "The cello is also tied to the trust. It's listed under the asset schedule, section 4.2. I gifted it to Lily, yes, but the insurance policy remains under the trust. Selling it without my authorization as trustee..." She paused. is not just improper, Marina. It's conversion, possibly theft. I sat there, laptop still open beside me, the gift letter glowing on the screen, and let that sink in. 25 years. My father had lived in that house for 25 years, telling everyone it was his, and never once checking the deed. "What do we do?" I asked quietly. Margaret didn't hesitate. Her expression stayed calm, but something sharper moved behind her eyes. "I'll call Jonathan in the morning," she said. "You keep every document you have, and Marina—" She paused just long enough for me to feel it. "Stay calm. We don't need noise, we just need the right signatures." I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, a legal pad in front of me, and 4 cups of coffee that went cold faster than I could drink them. And I did what I knew how to do best. I pulled records. First, the notarized gift letter, already stored in my drive, time-stamped, backed up, clean PDF. Second, Axel's text. I scrolled back through our messages until I found it, his confirmation of the sale, the amount, the dealer's name, Silverbridge Fine Strings, LLC, $22,500. I screenshotted every message, saved them with full timestamps, organized, labeled. Third, I searched the dealer, Silverbridge Fine Strings, Seattle-based. Their website had an active inventory page. And there she was, Harriet, listed as 1925 Carl Hoffman Cello, restored, asking price $148,000. I stared at the number longer than I expected to. Axel hadn't just sold it, he'd dumped it. No negotiation, no leverage, no hesitation. He wanted the cash fast. That was all that mattered. I took a screenshot of the listing, timestamp included, saved it. Fourth, and this was the one that made my hands shake. I logged into the old shared iCloud account my parents had set up years ago. Bills, subscriptions, random family access. Axel had never changed the password. In the sent folder, I found it. The wire transfer confirmation. $22,500 received from Silverbridge Fine Strings, LLC. Deposited directly into Axel Hawthorne's personal checking account. Not a trust account. Not a shared account. His account. He hadn't just sold it. He'd taken every dollar for himself and moved it wherever he wanted afterward. I saved the file, backed it up, printed a hard copy. By 2 in the morning, I had a folder on my desktop labeled Receipts, 14 files, each one a nail. I closed the laptop and sat there in the dark, the only sound the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing through wet streets outside. The money had landed in Axel's account. But where had it gone next? Did Vanessa get it directly? Or did Axel pay the contractor himself? I would figure that out. But first, there was one more place to look. The shared account had already given me enough. I didn't expect it to give me more, but it did. Buried under coupon emails and dentist reminders was a thread between Julia and Vanessa. Vanessa had started it. The date stopped me cold. September 3rd, 2 days before I left town. "Mom, the cello guy said he can do $22,500. That's enough to cover the pool and patio budget, at least the first phase. Tell Dad to move fast before Marina gets back." Julia replied 4 hours later. "I'll handle Marina. She'll get over it." I read it once, then again, then a third time, and then a fourth, slower, word by word, because I needed to be absolutely certain I wasn't misunderstanding what I was seeing. Vanessa had contacted the dealer, not Axel. Vanessa. She found the buyer, got the number, did the math, set the timeline. My father was the one who walked into my daughter's room and carried the cello out. But my sister was the one who chose the target and decided when it would happen. Julia covered it. Axel executed it. Vanessa designed it. I screenshotted the entire thread, every message, every timestamp, saved it into the receipts folder. 15 files now. At 6 a.m., I called Rachel. She picked up on the second ring. Because nurses don't really sleep, they just pause. I have everything, I said. Emails, texts, transfer records, the listing, all of it. Good, she said. So what's next? Margaret is calling her attorney this morning, Jonathan Pierce. There was a brief silence. Marina, she said carefully, you've never done this before. Not like this. I know. I looked down the hallway toward Lily's room. But no one's ever come for my child before. Jonathan Pierce's office was on the 4th floor of a sandstone building in Pioneer Square, the kind of place that smells like old paper, polished wood, and quiet authority. I'd worked in law offices before, but this felt different. This was Margaret's ground. She arrived in a black town car, gray wool coat, pearl earrings, a folder thick enough to bend at the edges. She walked straight through the lobby without hesitation. "Good morning, Mrs. Ellison," the receptionist said, the kind of greeting reserved for someone who had been important for a very long time. Jonathan Pierce was in his mid-50s, silver hair, thin-framed glasses, the kind of man who never needed to raise his voice to be heard. He shook my hand, offered coffee, and spread the documents across his desk like he was laying out a case he already understood. He reviewed everything. My receipts, Margaret's trust documents, the gift letter, the deed. Then he leaned back and laid it out. 3 steps. Clean, precise. First, he said, the cello is an irrevocable gift to Lily. However, it remains listed under the trust's insurance schedule. Selling it without the trustee's authorization constitutes unauthorized disposal and conversion of a minor's property. We file a police report. Second, we send a formal demand letter via certified mail. Axel has 14 days to return the full amount to the trust. If he fails, we proceed with civil action. Third, he turned slightly toward Margaret. The house. As trustee, you have full authority to revoke permissive occupancy. Under Washington law, Axel is not a tenant. He's a gratuitous occupant. 30-day written notice. And he must vacate. Margaret didn't hesitate. She nodded once, then picked up the pen Jonathan placed in front of her and signed every document, one after the other. Her hand trembled slightly. She was 91, but her signature didn't. Jonathan looked at me. "You have clear documentation and a very strong case," he said. "They're sitting on a pool they can't afford and a house they don't own." The Seattle Police Department lobby smelled like floor wax and burnt coffee. I sat in a hard plastic chair under fluorescent lights and waited 19 minutes before a deputy called my name. I brought everything with me. The notarized gift letter, screenshots of Axel's messages, the wire transfer confirmation, the trust asset schedule, the email thread between Julia and Vanessa, all printed, all organized, tabbed inside a manila folder. Paralegal habits don't disappear just because it's personal. The deputy, Officer Ramirez, mid-40s, steady expression, listened without interrupting. He took notes as I spoke, asked the questions I had already prepared for. When was the item removed? Who had access? Do you have documentation of ownership? I answered each one, handed over every page. He paused on the wire transfer longer than the others. Then he looked up at me. "Ma'am, given the value exceeds $1,000, this qualifies as felony theft under state law. Will also include conversion of property belonging to a minor." He wrote something down, tore off a small card and handed it to me. "You'll receive a case number today." I thanked him. When I told him the suspects were my parents, he didn't even blink. That somehow felt worse than anything else. Like this wasn't unusual. Like it happened more often than people admit. I sat in my car afterward, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel. Rain had started. Light at first. That kind of drizzle that feels harmless until you realize you're completely soaked. My phone rang. "Rachel, you okay?" "I just filed a police report against my parents." Silence. Then gently, "How do you feel?" I watched the rain gather on the windshield, distort the streetlights. "Lily asks about Harriet every day," I said. "She doesn't cry, she just asks. Like if she keeps asking, maybe the answer will change. I turned the key in the ignition. I'm fine. Okay, she said quietly. Axel found out about the police report faster than I expected. Julia had a friend who worked somewhere in dispatch. I never found out exactly how the information moved, but by 8 o'clock that evening, he was on my front porch, knocking hard enough to rattle the screen door. I opened the door, but kept the chain locked. Lily was in her room, door closed, headphones on, quietly practicing fingerings on her borrowed cello. Axel's face looked wrong. A strange mix of flushed red and drained gray, like his body couldn't decide whether to burn or shut down. You called the police. Not a question, a statement. I filed a report. Against your own parents, he said, voice low, controlled, the way it always got right before it snapped. Your own parents, Marina. Then he leaned forward slightly. Let me make something clear. You live in this house because I allow it. I can change every lock in this building by tomorrow morning. You and that kid can find somewhere else to go. I looked at him through the narrow gap in the chain. He stood there like he owned everything, like he always had, like the ground beneath him was something he had given himself. This house isn't yours, Dad. His eyes narrowed. Excuse me? You heard me. You've lived there 25 years, and never once checked the deed. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. His jaw shifted, tight, like he was trying to chew through something that wouldn't break. You're done, he said finally. You hear me? Done. I closed the door, locked it, slid the chain back into place. From Lily's room, I could still hear the faint sound of scales. She was still practicing, still moving forward. That's the thing about entitlement. It doesn't check paperwork, it assumes. Julia made her move the next morning, and she made it public. At 7:14 a.m., I checked the timestamp later when I saved it, she posted online. It was perfect. The kind of manipulation you could turn into a case study. Heartbroken today. My oldest daughter is trying to take legal action against her own parents over a piece of furniture. We gave everything to raise our children, and this is how we're repaid. Please keep our family in your prayers. Underneath, she attached a photo of me at 6 years old, yellow dress, Easter basket. I'm so sorry, Julia. Some kids just don't appreciate what they have. Praying for you and Axel. Stay strong. This is what happens when children think they know better than their parents. A few people tagged me. I didn't respond, didn't defend myself, didn't explain. I just took screenshots, every comment, every reaction, every timestamp, saved them all. 16 files now, a piece of furniture. That's what she called a century-old cello that had been played at Carnegie Hall. And somehow, that told me everything I needed to know about what my mother valued. Rachel called again after she saw the post. She's building a narrative, she said. Public sympathy, private pressure. This is textbook. I know. So what's your move? I looked at my laptop screen. Jonathan Pierce's email sat open. 2 attachments, a demand letter, a 30-day notice to vacate. I let the paper speak, I said. When? Certified mail goes out tomorrow. The next morning, Jonathan walked into the downtown Seattle post office and sent 2 envelopes, certified, return receipt requested. The first, addressed to Axel Hawthorne and Julia Hawthorne, contained a formal demand letter from the Ellison Legacy Trust. Full restitution of $22,500 within 14 days. The letter detailed everything: the unauthorized sale, the notarized gift, the trust asset listing, and it made one thing very clear. If they failed to comply, legal action would follow. The second envelope, same address, was a 30-day notice to vacate. Margaret Ellison, acting as trustee and legal owner, was formally revoking permissive occupancy of the property my parents had lived in for 25 years. The notice cited state statutes, referenced the trust deed, and gave them exactly 30 days from the date of receipt to remove themselves and everything they owned from the house. A third copy was sent to Vanessa Cole. Formal notice that the trust was pursuing restitution tied to the unauthorized sale, and that anyone who received or benefited from those funds could also be subject to legal action. Jonathan texted me the tracking numbers that afternoon. I saved them. That night, I sat on the couch and opened the tracking app. Both envelopes were already in transit, moving through the Seattle distribution center, like something small and quiet that would hit much harder when it arrived. Margaret called before I went to bed. Her voice was calm. It always was. "It's done," she said. "Now we wait." "Do you regret it?" I asked. There was a brief pause. "I regret trusting Axel as long as I did," she said. "I don't regret this." I refreshed the tracking page one more time before turning off the light. In transit. The next day, the status changed. Delivered. Signed by A. Hawthorne. Rachel lived just a few blocks from my parents' house. She wasn't watching them. She had simply lived there long before they ever moved in. But she happened to drive past at 3:17 that afternoon, and she saw enough. Axel was standing at the mailbox, holding a white envelope with a green certified label. He opened it right there in the yard. Rachel told me his face changed 3 times in 10 seconds. Normal, then red, then a kind of pale she'd only seen in emergency rooms. Julia came out of the house fast, like she already knew something was wrong. Axel handed her the letter without saying a word. She read it standing on the lawn, and her hands started shaking so badly the pages fluttered in the air. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. "Axel." His voice was different this time. No control, no arrogance, no dismissal, just fear. "Marina, what did your grandmother do?" He sounded like someone trying to hold on to something that was already gone. "This letter. It says we have to leave. That this house. I've lived here 25 years. "The deed says Ellison Legacy Trust," I replied. "It's always been hers. You just never checked." "She's confused," he said quickly. "She doesn't know what She knows exactly what she's doing. She signed everything herself." "I'll fight this," he snapped. "I'll get a lawyer." "You should," I said. "His number is on the letter. Jonathan Pierce. He's been her attorney for 20 years. I'm sure he'll be expecting your call." There was a sound on the other end of the line, not anger, something closer to collapse. "You'll regret this," he said. "Maybe," I answered, "but Lily won't." And I hung up. I placed my phone face down on the table and sat there for a long time, listening to the quiet settle around me. For 25 years, my father had told everyone that house was his. He never once checked the paperwork. That's how entitlement works. It doesn't ask, it takes. The next day, Axel hired an attorney, a real estate lawyer from a firm in Bellevue, $300 an hour, paid with a $3,000 retainer pulled from what was left of the cello money. The attorney did exactly what any competent attorney would do. He pulled the deed, reviewed the trust documents Jonathan provided, and sat Axel down in a conference room. Then he told him the truth. The house belonged to the Ellison Legacy Trust. It always had. There was no sale, no transfer, no quitclaim deed, no record of any kind. Axel had been living there entirely at Margaret's discretion, and discretion has limits. Axel tried to argue adverse possession. His attorney explained it requires hostile, open, and continuous occupation for a set period of time, and Axel's occupancy had always been permissive. You can't claim ownership of something when you were invited in. He tried arguing delay, saying Margaret waited too long to act. The attorney shut that down just as quickly. She acted within weeks of discovering the sale. No delay, no defense. Finally, the attorney gave him one piece of advice. Negotiate. You don't have grounds to fight the eviction. Focus on repayment. See if Mrs. Ellison will accept a payment plan. Rachel later told me Axel stood up, said something under his breath, and walked out without shaking hands. $3,000 gone. And that wasn't the end of it. The pool contractor had already sent the next invoice, $42,000 due upon completion. The pool, already more than halfway finished. The pool built with my daughter's cello. The money was disappearing. The deadlines were closing in. And Axel hadn't paid back a single dollar. Julia made her move the following Tuesday. She showed up at Margaret's house with a bouquet of sunflowers and a tin of Danish butter cookies, the same kind she brought every Christmas, like sincerity could be scheduled. Margaret's caregiver answered the door and later told me everything. Julia sat on the edge of the sofa, clutching the flowers like they were protection. Margaret sat across from her in the green velvet chair and let her speak first. "Margaret, the family is falling apart," Julia said. "Marina has gone too far. Police reports, lawyers, this is destroying everything. If you could just stop this, we can go back to normal. Please. For the family." Margaret didn't interrupt. She let the silence settle. Then she poured tea from the pot on the table, placed the cup carefully in front of Julia, and folded her hands. "Julia," she said calmly, "I allowed my son to live in my home for 25 years without charging him a single dollar." She paused. "I gave my great-granddaughter a cello I had played since I was 19, and you and Axel sold it to build a swimming pool." "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that," Margaret said calmly. "I've read the emails." She let that settle for a moment before continuing. "And I'm also aware that you're sitting in my house, drinking my tea, asking me to forgive the theft of a 10-year-old child's most treasured possession, so your family can stay comfortable." Julia opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Margaret stood up slowly, deliberately, the way someone stands when they've already finished the conversation in their mind. "The door is behind you," she said. "Jonathan will be in touch." Julia left. Evelyn later told me she was crying before she even reached her car. Margaret sat back down, lifted her teacup, and took a measured sip. Then she glanced toward Evelyn and said, almost thoughtfully, "She brought store-bought cookies. She couldn't even manage homemade." 14 days. That was the deadline. 14 days to return the $22,500. On day 15, Axel sent a single email to Jonathan. One sentence. "The money has been spent. I don't have $22,500. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement that the money had never been his to begin with." Jonathan printed the email, placed it into the case file, and moved forward exactly as promised. He filed a civil suit. Ellison Legacy Trust versus Axel Hawthorne and Julia Hawthorne. Claims: conversion, unjust enrichment, breach of fiduciary duty tied to trust-managed assets. I was listed as legal guardian representing Lily. The court scheduled a hearing 6 weeks out. Fast-tracked, Jonathan explained, because a minor's property was involved, and the documentation was airtight. A judge had already reviewed the filing and determined there was sufficient merit to expedite the case, but before any hearing came service. A process server arrived at my parents' house on a Thursday at 4:45 p.m. Not by accident. It was the hour when neighbors were outside, pulling into driveways, collecting mail, walking their dogs. The kind of timing that ensured people would notice. He knocked. Axel opened the door. "Axel Hawthorne?" "Yes." "You've been served, sir. Have a good day." The papers were handed over. The server turned and walked away. Axel stood there in the doorway, holding the blue-backed complaint. Behind him, through the screen door, Julia appeared, her face pale, almost the same color as the curtain she was gripping. A neighbor across the street paused mid-step. People saw. Word spread. The image my parents had spent decades building started to crack. Vanessa's consequences came next. Not from me, not from Margaret. From the contractor. Westlake Custom Pools had been watching. Because contractors always watch when money starts to look unstable. They called Vanessa. "Mrs. Cole, we need a written guarantee for the remaining balance, $42,000 due upon completion." "My parents are handling it," she said. "Your parents are currently defendants in a civil suit. We need confirmation from you." Vanessa and Derek didn't have $42,000. They didn't have half of it. Derek's credit was already stretched thin from a truck he couldn't afford. They tried a home equity line. Denied. Personal loan. Denied. Within days, Westlake filed a mechanic's lien against Vanessa's property. That's when she called me. And for the first time through all of this, she was crying. "Are you happy now?" she demanded. "The family is falling apart because of you. There's a lien on my house. Derek is talking about leaving. Is this what you wanted?" I let her speak, waited until the only sound left was her breathing. Then I said, "Vanessa, you sent Mom an email on September 3rd. You told her to sell Lily's cello before I got home. You chose the target. You set the timing. You calculated the amount." Silence. "Everything happening to you right now started with that email, not with me." She hung up. I felt nothing, no satisfaction, no guilt. Just a clear, steady sense, like numbers finally adding up. A week later, Derek filed for legal separation. He didn't want the debt. Now, this is the part everyone waits for. But before we get there, if this story feels familiar in any way, you're not alone. Hit like so more people can find it. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And stay with me. Because the courtroom, that's where everything came into focus. King County Courthouse, 3rd floor, courtroom 3B. The air smelled like old wood and recycled air. The lighting gave everything a faded yellow tone, like a photograph left too long in a drawer. I sat on the left side of the gallery next to Jonathan Pierce. Margaret sat beside me, posture straight, hands resting over her gray coat, like she'd belonged in rooms like this her entire life. Rachel sat 2 rows behind us. She insisted on coming. "You're not doing this alone," she told me. Axel and Julia entered from the opposite side. Axel wore a blazer that didn't quite fit anymore. Julia held a tissue in both hands. Their attorney, a younger man I didn't recognize, carried a thin folder. Thin, because there wasn't much to defend. Vanessa wasn't there. She wasn't named in the suit. Or maybe she just couldn't face it. Axel's attorney made his arguments. Adverse possession, denied. The court recognized permissive occupancy. Delay, denied. Margaret had acted immediately after discovering the sale. Every angle, closed. Then their attorney shifted strategies. He tried to argue that the cello was a shared family asset, something communal, not something that belonged solely to Lily. Jonathan stood, calm, precise, and then he began placing documents on the table, one after another. The notarized gift letter, the trust asset schedule, Section 4.2, the wire transfer confirmation, the email chain between Julia and Vanessa, time-stamped, authenticated, the police report, and finally, Julia's post, the one where she called a century-old Carnegie Hall instrument a piece of furniture. He set each document down with quiet certainty, like cards in a hand that could not be beaten. The judge, a woman in her 60s reading glasses resting on a chain, turned toward Axel. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said, "did you have authorization from the trustee to sell this instrument?" Axel straightened slightly. "It was in my house." The judge didn't move. "That is not what I asked." The room went completely still. Axel opened his mouth, then closed it. The judge removed her glasses. "I've heard enough," she said. "I will issue my ruling." The ruling took 4 minutes to read. It felt like 4 hours. She put her glasses back on and spoke without emotion, because she didn't need any. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff. The evidence establishes that the 1925 Carl Hoffman cello was irrevocably gifted to the minor child, Lily Hawthorne, and that its sale was conducted without authorization from the trustee or consent from the child's legal guardian. She turned a page. Axel Hawthorne and Julia Hawthorne are ordered to make full restitution of $22,500 to the Ellison Legacy Trust. If payment cannot be made in full, a structured repayment plan will be implemented, subject to wage garnishment upon default. Another page. The 30-day notice to vacate is upheld. The respondents are required to remove themselves and their personal property from the residence within 30 calendar days. Then she looked directly at Axel. The court further directs the instrument dealer, Silverbridge Fine Strings, to cooperate in the return of the cello, pending financial arrangements with the trust. Axel pushed his chair back and stood abruptly. "This is my house. I've lived there for 20... Mr. Hawthorne, The judge didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The deed says otherwise. Sit down. He sat. His hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles turned white. Julia was crying quietly into her tissue, steady, repetitive, like something left running. I turned toward Margaret. She wasn't smiling. But there was something in her expression, stillness, resolution, like a note that had finally found its place. She reached for my hand. Her fingers were light, warm. "You did the right thing," she whispered. The gavel came down once, a single clean sound. It echoed through the courtroom and settled like the final word at the end of a very long sentence. 30 days later, a moving truck pulled into the driveway of the house on Birchwood Avenue, the house my father had claimed for 25 years. I didn't go. I made that decision early. This wasn't a victory. It was a correction. Rachel drove past on her way to work and told me what she saw. Axel loading boxes in silence. No anger, no shouting, just the slow, mechanical movement of someone who had run out of arguments. Julia carrying a lamp out the front door, not looking at him, not looking at anyone. They moved into a small, 2-bedroom apartment outside the city. Julia's sister helped them find it. The rent alone was more than Axel had ever paid in 25 years of living in a house he didn't own. 2 weeks later, Jonathan sent a 1-page summary of the case to the extended family, at Margaret's request. Not to humiliate, to correct the record. It was entirely factual. The trust deed, the unauthorized sale, the restitution order, the eviction. No commentary, no emotion, just documentation. The calls stopped. All of them. Patricia never reached out again. Thomas disappeared completely. The cousin who had told me I should be ashamed quietly deleted her comment in the middle of the night. I know because I saw the notification come through, around 2 in the morning. That hour when guilt tends to surface. 3 weeks after the ruling, the first payment arrived. $2,500. Automatically withdrawn under court order. Remaining balance, $20,000. At that rate, it would take years to repay. Axel would be well into his 60s by the time the debt was gone, paying for a pool, built with his granddaughter's stolen inheritance. I tried not to think about it as anything more than numbers, just math. It was early November when Jonathan called. "It's done," he said. "You can come pick her up." The cello. Silverbridge had complied as soon as the court order came through. They returned Harriet to Jonathan's office. Margaret covered the reimbursement from the trust, the same fund Axel would now spend years paying back into. I drove downtown alone. Jonathan had the case waiting for me on the conference table in his office. I stepped closer, unlatched it, and slowly lifted the lid. And there she was. Harriet. The 1925 Carl Hoffman. The same fine crack across the top plate, carefully restored. The same warm amber finish. That faint scent of aged wood and rosin lily always said smelled like a library. That played music. I brushed my thumb across the strings. They answered softly, low, full, like a voice that had been holding something in for too long. I drove home with the case strapped into the passenger seat. It looked ridiculous. I didn't care. I carried it inside, walked straight to Lily's room, and placed it back in the corner. The same angle, as if it had never left. Lily got home at 3:40. She dropped her backpack by the door, walked down the hallway, and stopped when she reached her room. She didn't run or call out. She just stepped inside slowly, knelt down, unzipped the case, and looked at it for a long moment, like she needed to be sure it was real. Then she reached in and rested her hand on the neck, right where the varnish was worn smooth. "Hi, Harriet," she whispered. I stood in the hallway, one hand against the doorframe, and I cried. Not loudly, not all at once, just quietly. The kind of quiet that comes when something lost is finally returned, and you realize how tightly you've been holding yourself together. Lily didn't ask where it had been. She didn't need to. She just started tuning. That night, after she fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote an email. 3 recipients: Axel, Julia, Vanessa. It was short. I had spent years explaining myself to people who never listened. This time, I didn't. Effective immediately, I am establishing no contact boundaries. All communication regarding restitution will go through Jonathan Pierce's office. Do not contact me or Lily directly. I wish you well, but I will be protecting my daughter and myself moving forward. That was it. Axel replied within the hour. One sentence. You'll regret this. I didn't respond. Julia sent 6 emails over the next 3 days. Long, emotional. Scripture quotes. Childhood memories. Lines that all began the same way. After everything we've done for you. I didn't open a single one. I forwarded them all to Jonathan, unread, and asked him to flag anything relevant. Vanessa sent one message, 4 days later. I'm sorry. I read it, sat with it, and didn't reply. Not because I wanted to punish her, because I wasn't ready to forgive her, and I wasn't going to pretend I was. Maybe someday. Maybe not. That was allowed. The next Saturday, I went to a hardware store near Pioneer Square and bought a new deadbolt. Brushed nickel. Top of the line. I installed it myself. Not as cleanly as Axel would have. But it locked. And that was enough. 2 keys, one for me, one for Lily, no one else. That night, I stood at the front door and tested it. Once, twice, 3 times. Each click settled something inside me. Family isn't a debt you inherit, and a locked door isn't cruelty. It's a boundary. 3 months after the ruling, our Saturdays changed. They became ours. Every week, Lily and I would drive to Margaret's house, a craftsman-style home on a quiet, tree-lined street, a front porch that dipped just slightly in the middle, a garden Margaret still managed from her window. Evelyn would let us in. Margaret would already be waiting in the music room. A small, sunlit space at the back of the house, an upright piano, decades of framed concert programs, a metronome ticking steadily, like a heartbeat. Lily would set up Harriet, Margaret would sit at the piano, and then the house would fill with sound. An hour, sometimes 2, cello and piano weaving together the way 2 voices do when they've known each other for a lifetime. Margaret showed Lily the vibrato technique she had learned decades ago. It starts in the arm, she would say, guiding Lily's wrist gently. Not the finger. The finger follows. The arm decides. Lily listened with a kind of focus that doesn't come from discipline, but from understanding. Understanding that what she was being given couldn't be bought or taken. One Saturday, Margaret said to her, "You keep this cello, Lily, but more importantly, you keep the music. That's the part no one can ever take from you." Lily nodded, her bow resting lightly against the strings. "I know, Grandma Margaret." I sat in the corner, in the same green chair Margaret had sat in the day she sent Julia away. I held a cup of tea and listened. Sometimes I closed my eyes and let the music fill the room, like warmth, like something finally at peace. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was carrying everything on my shoulders. No obligations, no performances, no folding chairs at the edge of someone else's table. Just music, tea, and the kind of quiet that only comes after you finally stop tolerating the noise. In November, I started therapy. It was the first time I had ever sat across from someone and talked about my family without trying to defend them, without softening the truth. Her name was Dr. Langford, and during our second session, she said something I've never forgotten. "Marina, setting a boundary isn't betrayal. It's the first honest thing you've done in a family that rewarded dishonesty." I sat with that for a long time. About 5 months after the court ruling, everything had settled into a new rhythm. Axel had paid $12,500 back into the trust, 5 payments of $2,500. He still owed $10,000, 4 more months of payments, as long as he didn't miss a single one. He and Julia were living in a small apartment outside Seattle. From what little I heard through Rachel, they kept to themselves. Axel picked up part-time consulting work with a local construction company. Julia volunteered at a church thrift store. They were quiet now. Whether that quiet was peace or just exhaustion, I couldn't tell. Vanessa's house sold in January. The lien from the contractor, combined with Derek's legal fees after the separation, stripped most of the equity. The pool sat unfinished. A concrete shell, no tile, no water, no purpose. In the listing photos, it was covered with a blue tarp, like something someone had tried to hide but couldn't quite bury. Vanessa moved into a rental with the twins. Derek moved out of state. Margaret's house, the one on Birchwood Avenue, sat empty for about a month after Axel left. Then she offered it to me and Lily. $1 a month, she said. It's still in the trust, but a house like that, it should have music in it. Lily was accepted into the Seattle Youth Symphony that October. She was the youngest cellist in the ensemble. Her audition piece was the Elgar Cello Concerto, the same piece Margaret had performed decades ago at Carnegie Hall. I looked at our life, therapy, the house, the orchestra, those quiet Saturdays, and something became very clear. I hadn't lost my family. I had let go of a version of family that was never truly mine. What I kept was better. December. Seattle Youth Symphony, Winter Recital, Benaroya Hall. The lobby smelled like damp coats and perfume, and that familiar hum of parents trying to find their seats before the lights dim. I sat in row 5, center section. Margaret was on my left, in her gray coat, pearl earrings catching the light just slightly, her posture still perfect. Rachel sat on my right, already recording on her phone before the performance had even started. The lights dimmed. The stage lit up in warm amber, the same color as Harriet's varnish. Lily walked out from backstage, black dress, hair pulled back neatly. She held the cello by the neck with that careful balance, like something both fragile and unbreakable. She sat down, adjusted the end pin, set the bow across the strings. She didn't look nervous. She looked ready. The conductor lifted his baton. The orchestra breathed in, and Lily began. The Elgar Cello Concerto. First movement, the same piece Margaret had played, on the same instrument decades earlier. The sound filled the hall, deep, warm, aching in that way only a cello can be, like it was saying something words could never quite reach. I closed my eyes, and I let it all go. Every argument, every document, every sleepless night, every locked door, all of it, quiet. Margaret reached over and took my hand. She squeezed it once. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The final note lingered in the air, just for a second, like the room was holding its breath. Then Lily lowered her bow and smiled. Not a performer's smile, a child's smile. The kind that only exists when a child knows. She is safe. The applause came after, loud, full. But that moment before it, that silence, that's the one I'll remember. And sitting there in that silence just before the applause, I understood something I wish I had learned years earlier. Love is not proven by how much you endure. It is proven by what you are willing to protect. For a long time, I believed being a good daughter meant staying quiet, keeping peace, accepting things that felt wrong just to avoid conflict. I told myself that sacrifice was love, that loyalty meant tolerance. It doesn't. Real love does not ask you to ignore harm. It does not demand that your child pay the price for someone else's comfort. If there is one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this. Boundaries are not walls built out of anger. They are decisions built out of clarity. You are allowed to choose safety. You are allowed to choose truth. And you are allowed to walk away from anything that asks you to betray yourself or the people you are responsible for protecting. Because in the end, peace is not something you're given. It's something you decide to keep. If this story stayed with you, if even one part of it felt familiar, take a moment to like this video so it can reach someone who needs it right now. Share me where you're watching from, and tell me honestly, what would you have done in my place? And if you believe in stories about truth, boundaries, and finding your way back to yourself, This channel is where voices like yours are heard and stories like this continue. You can also share this with someone who might be struggling to choose themselves. Sometimes, one story is enough to remind someone they're not alone. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for staying until the very end.